The Case of Jennie Brice by Mary Roberts Reinhardt. Read by Ghosty Keys. Chapter 6. The newspapers were full of the Ladley case, with its curious solution and many surprises. It was considered unique in many ways. Mr. Pittman had always read all the murder trials and used to talk about corpus delicti and writs of habeas corpus. You know, corpus being the legal way, I think, of selling corpses. Anyways, so I came out to the Ladley trial, for it came to trial ultimately, with only one point of law that I was sure of. That was that it was mighty hard to prove a man of murder unless you can show a corpse. And that was the weakness in the Ladley case. There was a body, but it could not be identified. The police held Mr. Ladley for a day or two, but with nothing appearing as the river went down, they let him go. Mr. Holcomb, who was still occupying second floor front, almost wept with rage and despair when he read it in the newspapers. He was also still working on the case in his own curious way, wandering along the wharves at night, writing letters all over the country to learn about Philip Ladley's previous wife and his wives. But nothing seemed to get anywhere. The newspapers had been full of the Jennie Brice disappearance, for disappearance it proved to be. So far as could be learned, she had not left the city that night or since. But as she was a striking woman, very blonde as I have said, with a full voice and languid manner, she could hardly have taken refuge anywhere without having been discovered. The morning after her disappearance, a young woman, tall like Jennie Brice and fair, had been seen in Union Station. But she was accompanied by a young man who bought her magazines and papers and bade her on an excited farewell, sending his love to various members of the family and promising to feed the canary. So this was not seriously considered. A sort of general alarm went out around the country. When she was younger, she had been pretty well known on Broadway and in the theaters of New York. One way or another, I guess the Liberty Theater got a lot of free advertising from the case, and I guess Miss Hope's salary was raised. The police communicated with Jennie Brice's people. She had seen a sister in Olean, New York, but she hadn't heard from her. She had a sister in Olean, but she hadn't heard from her. The sister wrote, I heard later, that Jennie had been unhappy with Philip Ladley and had been afraid he would kill her. Miss Hope told the same story, but as they say, there was no corpus, as the lawyers say. And finally, the police had to set Mr. Ladley free. Beyond making an attempt to get bail and failing, he had done nothing. Asked about his wife, he merely shrugged his shoulders and said she had left him and would turn up all right. He was unconcerned. He smoked cigarettes all day and slept well, and in fact he looked better, since he had nothing to drink while he was in jail. 2 or 3 days after his arrest, he sent for the manuscript of his play. Mr. Howe came for it on the Thursday of that week. I was on my hands and knees scrubbing the parlor floor when he rang the bell, and I let him in. It seemed to me that he looked tired and pale. "Well, Mrs. Pittman," he said, smiling, "what did you find in the cellar when the water went down?" "Well, I'm glad to say that I didn't find what I feared, Mr. Howe." "Not even the onyx clock?" "No, not even the clock. I feel like I've lost a friend. A clock is a lot of company." "Do you know what I think?" he said, looking at me closely. "I think you put that clock away yourself, and in all of the excitement you've forgotten all about it." "That's nonsense. Think hard. You knew the water was rising. The Ladleys would have to be moved up to the second floor front where the clock stood. You went in, looked around to see if the room was ready. You saw the clock. Knowing the Ladleys were quarreling and apt to throw things, you... Nothing but a soap dish, and only that once. And then you took the clock and put it in the attic, I say, in the old trunk." "I did nothing of the sort. I went in, as you say. I put up an old splasher because of the way he throws ink about, and then I wound the clock, put the key under it, and went out. And the key is gone, too." "Huh. I wish I could find that clock, Mrs. Pittman." "So do I." "Ladley went out Sunday afternoon about 3, didn't he? He got back at 5. I turned and looked at him. "Yes, Mr. Howe. Perhaps you know something about that." "I?" He changed colors. "Well, 20 years of dunning boarders has made me pretty sharp at reading faces," and he looked uncomfortable as if he owed me money. "I?" And I knew right then that I had been right about the voice. It had been his. "Yes, you," I retorted. "You were here Sunday morning and spent time with the Ladleys. I'm the old she-devil. I noticed you didn't tell your friend, Mr. Holcomb, about having been here on Sunday." He was quick to recover. I'll tell you about it, Mrs. Pittman," he said, smiling. "You see, all my life I have wished for an onyx clock. It has been my ambition, my great desire. Leaving the house that Sunday morning and hearing the ticking of the clock upstairs, I recognized that it was an onyx clock, clambered from my boat through the upper window, and so reached it. The clock showed fight. But after stunning it with a chair..." "Exactly," I said. "Then the thing Mrs. Ladley said she would not do was probably to wind the clock." He dropped his bantering manner at once. "Mrs. Pittman, I don't know what you heard or did not hear, but I want you to give me a little time before you tell anybody that I was here Sunday morning. In return, I'll find your clock." I hesitated. However put out he was, though, he didn't look like a criminal. Besides, he was a friend of my niece's, and, as they say, blood is thicker than even flood water. "There was nothing wrong about my being here," he went on. "But I don't want it known. I don't want to spoil a good story, Mrs. Pittman." Well, I did not quite understand that although those who follow the trial carefully may do so, poor Mr. Howe, I'm sure he believed that it was only a good story. He got the description of my onyx clock and wrote it down, and I gave him the manuscript for Mr. Ladley, and that was the last I saw of him for some time. But that Thursday proved to be an exciting day, for late in the afternoon, Terry, digging around the mud in the cellar, came across my missing gray false front near the coal vault and brought it up grinning. Just before 6, Mr. Graves, the detective, rang the bell and then let himself in, and I found him in the lower hall looking around. "Well, Mrs. Pittman, has our friend come back yet?" "She was no friend of mine." "Not she, Ladley. He's out this evening. He'll probably be coming by for his clothes." And I felt my knees waver, as they always did when he was spoken of. "He may want to stay here," said Mr. Graves. "In fact, I think that's just what he will want." "Not here. No, the very thought of it makes me quake." "No, if he comes here, better take him in. I want to know where he is." I tried to say that I wouldn't have him, but the old habit of award asserted itself. From taking a bottle of beer or slice of pie to telling one where one might or might not live, the police were autocrats in that neighborhood. Respectable woman that I am, my neighbor's fears of the front office have infected me. Even in 1910. "All right, Mr. Graves," I said. He pushed the parlor door open and looked in, whistling. "This is the place, isn't it?" "Yes, but it was upstairs that he—" "I see. Tall woman, Mrs. Ladley?" "Tall and blonde, yes, very air in her manner." He nodded and stood still, looking in and whistling. "I never heard her speak of a town named Horner, did you?" "Horner? No." "I see." He turned and wandered out into the hall again, still whistling. At the door, however, he stopped and turned. "Look anything like this?" he asked, and he held out his hands with a small Kodak picture of the palm. With a small Kodak picture on the palm. Sorry. It was a snapshot of a children's frolic in a village street, with some onlookers in the background. Around one of the heads had been drawn a circle in pencil. I took it to the gas jet and looked at it closely. It was a tall woman with a hat, not unlike Jennie Brice. She was looking over the crowd. I could only see her face, and that in shadow, so I shook my head. "I thought not. We have a lot of stage pictures of her, but what with the false hair and being retouched beyond recognition, they don't really do much." "Take him on if he comes, and keep your eyes open. You'd better feed him well, so he won't kill you." So I had plenty to think on when I was cooking Mr. Reynolds' supper. The chance that I might have Mr. Ladley back in my house again. And the woman at Horner. For it had come to me like a flash as Mr. Graves left, that the horn on the paper slip might just say Horner. That's chapter 6.